Police in Phoenix, Arizona were asked to solve the mystery of a limb found in a dumpster. From just a small body part, archaeologists, toxicologists, and DNA scientists pieced together enough information about the victim to lead police to the killer. On June 8, 1992, a man looking through a garbage dumpster made a frightening discovery.
A dumpster diver found a large plastic bag, which he unwrapped, not knowing what was in it, and discovered this severed leg.
There was also a saw. Phoenix homicide detectives Rico Fragoso and Joseph Petrosino were first on the scene.
I think the longer I stay here, the more bizarre the cases become.
It's very scary. Since I moved here, there's been a lot of incidents where cops had to be called.
The waste management driver, Jesse Pena, told police he emptied the dumpster just 1 hour earlier.
Where the dumpster is right now is not where I left it. So somebody pushed it back. I don't know who it was.
I immediately thought this guy, meaning the victim, has been scattered probably through other dumpsters in the area. And now we're going to need to go out and try and locate the rest of the body in the other dumpsters.
Detectives searched every dumpster within a 5-mile radius. They were hoping to find more of the body to compare to dental records, fingerprints, or missing persons reports. They found nothing. Although there wasn't much to autopsy, the medical examiner could tell it was the leg of a male Caucasian between 30 and 40 years old.
The presence of scars on the knee are helpful in that this is a person who's had either trauma or surgery, in this case surgical type scars. He's had surgical intervention on the knee.
Initially, investigators thought the scars would help identify the victim until they learned how common knee surgery had become.
The muscle from the thigh of the leg was analyzed, and in the screening for the common drugs of abuse, we found significant levels of methamphetamine, or speed, and trace quantities of its primary metabolite, amphetamine.
A possible indication the incident was drug-related. And Dr. Keene could tell that the victim was dead before the leg was removed.
The relative absence of blood in the leg was indicative that the leg had been severed after death when there was no ongoing active circulation in the body. This clearly was not natural disease and did not have the features of an accident, such as an industrial accident. The precise mechanism of death was not apparent with the examination of just the leg. So we classified the death as a homicidal violence, manner of death homicide.
An anthropologist measured the femur, the largest bone in the body, and estimated the victim was 6 feet tall. There were no missing persons reports of a 30 to 40-year-old white male 6 feet tall, possibly involved with methamphetamine. Methamphetamine is an illegal street drug, a stimulant commonly known as speed or crank. By the mid-1990s, authorities say that Mexican drug lords were funneling huge amounts of methamphetamine into Arizona. Methamphetamine overtook cocaine as the #1 drug of addiction reported by Arizona drug treatment centers. With the rise in the use of methamphetamine, there was also a rise in the number of people involved in manufacturing and distribution. Several days after the discovery of the limb, investigators got a telephone call about a missing methamphetamine dealer. Police hoped it was the break they were looking for. Police in Phoenix, Arizona had a seemingly impossible task: to find a killer loose in their city when their only evidence was a severed leg. Forensic tests revealed the individual was a male Caucasian, 6 feet tall, between 30 and 40 years old. Not long after these forensic tests were completed, a woman called police headquarters asking how to fill out a missing persons report. She said her boyfriend hadn't returned home.
He's missing. He's been missing for a few days now. How do I go about filling out a missing persons report? He had a pair of sneakers on and a pair of shorts.
She said it wasn't uncommon for him to leave town, go to Las Vegas, be there for a couple of days, but he'd always returned. He'd always answered pages and phone messages, and that wasn't happening in this case.
The woman said her boyfriend was Norman Kloss, and at first glance matched the profile. Kloss was 32 years old, stood 6 feet tall, had undergone knee surgery, and was a methamphetamine dealer.
He was a friendly, outgoing, social type of person. He had plenty of friends in the valley. No one ever said anything derogatory about Norman that I know of or that I recall.
Although Norman Kloss was well liked, he undoubtedly had his share of enemies.
So I want you to take your time, look at them thoroughly, and tell us what you think. We'll be asking you some questions.
Kloss's girlfriend, Patricia, identified the surgical scar and the tennis shoe and sock as the type Norman usually wore. But investigators wanted to be certain of the identification, so they suggested DNA testing.
If the leg was thought to have come from Norman Kloss, let's get his parents and let's do a reverse paternity.
Since half of our DNA comes from our mother and half from our father, it would have been simple to determine if the limb was Norman's by comparing his DNA to his parents' DNA. But when detectives learned Kloss was adopted, they knew that would be impossible. Scientists hoped to find some other way to make an identification. In researching Kloss's background, police discovered that he had donated one of his kidneys to his younger sister. On a long shot, police contacted the hospital in Houston, Texas, where the transplant had taken place. Cell samples are routinely taken from prospective donors to make sure the recipient won't reject their organ. Fortunately for investigators, the hospital in Houston had a policy of keeping its cell samples for 100 years. DNA testing would be possible after all. This autoradiograph shows the DNA from the leg muscle compared to the cells taken from Norman Kloss.
The interpretation of autorads are very simple. You're doing simple pattern comparison. You're looking at DNA banding patterns, asking the question, are the DNA banding patterns the same? Are they in the same orientation, in the same location on the autorad? It's very simple, very easy to interpret. The leg, or the muscle tissue from the leg, originated from Norman Kloss.
I'd never had a DNA case before, prior to this, where we had matched up anyone like that. I was very ecstatic when I found this out, and I notified his family back in Texas.
Now that police had positively identified the victim, their focus turned to identifying the killer.
I was concerned there was someone out there that had either lost it and was going to cause a lot more grievance to the Phoenix Police Department.
Police began questioning Norman's friends to determine his whereabouts on his last day alive. Norman's girlfriend, Patricia, was the most helpful.
We learned from her that Norman had kind of a colorful past as a methamphetamine cooker. One of the people that he probably had seen last was his business partner, who was also a methamphetamine cooker by the name of Graham King. And the two of them had been friends for a long time, but had recently had a falling out and had become rivals in the drug business.
Detectives found Norman Kloss's car just a block away from King's home. With a search warrant, detectives wanted to find a safe way to search King's home, which was a fortress. 2 vicious Rottweilers guarded the backyard. Cameras were mounted outside, giving King a 360-degree look around the entire circumference. Gun ports provided a clear shot to every inch of the property. The doors and windows were reinforced.
Anything less than a bulldozer wasn't going to get you in a timely fashion. And certainly, as a drug manufacturer, that would give him time to dispose of a lot of the evidence.
Police waited until King walked outside to his car before serving the search warrant. Once inside the house, investigators uncovered an arsenal.
He was into weapons, all sorts of weapons, firearms and crossbows and throwing knives, and everything is hidden inside of the residence and nooks and crannies that he specially made for these weapons. In his bed, in the walls, behind doors. He had every known weapon you can think of, from weapons made 400 years ago to the present time.
Detectives also found marijuana and methamphetamine.
He probably tasted his product way more often than he should have. It might have affected his reasoning.
And in the laundry room, investigators noticed that someone, presumably King, had recently painted the walls and floor.
You could tell it was fresh paint. The smell was still there of the paint. You could also detect an odor of either pine salt or Clorox, very strong presence in the laundry room.
But could investigators find out if the laundry room had been the scene of violence, or did they get there too late? The new paint had covered potential evidence, or did it? In the laundry room of Graham King's home, the walls and floor had recently been painted and the room disinfected. Either King was a meticulous housekeeper, or he had gone to a great deal of trouble to hide something. Determined to find which one it was, investigators removed the laundry table that was built into the wall.
Hey, Rico, take a look at this.
Behind the table were some tiny spots.
We found some spots which we believe to be blood. We took samples of that, and then we cut out the entire wall.
The spots were evaluated with a Kastle-Meyer test, which reacts with the iron component in blood. That test was positive.
Despite the flushing and washing attempts, they were still able to find the traces of human blood and identify the scene as being a scene of considerable bloodletting.
The next step was to determine whose blood. The DNA from the tiny specks on the wall was compared to the DNA from the muscles in the amputated leg. They matched.
Wow. It reinforced my belief in the power of RFLP technology and DNA technology at the time.
Graham King refused to answer questions. But police soon got an unexpected break. A telephone call from one of King's friends who had suspected King was involved in foul play. The caller was Troy Killop, who said he was working in Graham King's backyard when Norman Kloss went inside, but never came out. Although he wasn't an eyewitness, he was the next best thing, an ear witness. This is his audio tape statement to police.
I heard a bunch of screaming, scuffling. I heard somebody yell, well, kill me, just kill me. And the man screamed my name. I heard the gunshot, the whole deal. I heard him cutting the man up with an axe. I don't know for a fact because I can't visualize it, but I can reconcile with the sounds and the things that I heard, and he'll never leave it.
Troy Killop told police he waited for an hour, then knocked on the door to collect his tools.
Banging on the front of the house. And he unbars all the doors, and they're all steel doors and stuff, and he comes out the front and he's just shaking and quaking, and he was wearing different clothes at the same time. He said, come on. And I step in and I smell nothing but heavy duty pine saw cleaner everywhere. I turn around, I walk out.
Killop also said that King and Kloss were involved in a dispute, but it wasn't about drugs. It was about a woman.
Graham King's girlfriend had been involved with Norman Kloss, and she might have become pregnant because of Norman Kloss. Graham King found out, and that's what caused, we think, or motivated the murder.
This is a big drug operation, is what it all seems like. What kind of drug? This guy that got killed was this other guy's old lady, and that's why he got killed. Okay, it was methamphetamine. Okay. And they manufactured everything right there in Phoenix. Okay.
Graham King was arrested and charged with first-degree murder. Despite the results of DNA tests and the medical examiner's opinion that Norman Kloss was dead before his leg was removed, Norman's girlfriend, Patricia, refuses to believe Norman is dead, which was evident when we asked her for an interview.
Norman's not dead. His death was staged, and I just feel like the show is not based on truth, and therefore I can, in good conscience, contribute to it.
Patricia believes Norman faked his own death to avoid a drug-related confrontation. As prosecutors prepared for the trial, they had another challenge: persuading their primary witness to testify. Prosecutors believe that Norman Kloss went to Graham King's home unaware that King was angry with him for his involvement with his girlfriend.
What's going on with you? Anything? What are you talking about? What do you mean? I'm not screwing my girl.
The two argued.
Yeah, what do you think I'm gonna do about it? What do you think? You're gonna kill me? Yeah, freaking kill me! Kill me! Try!
He placed the body into garbage bags. Sometime later that night, he dumped the bags in various dumpsters throughout the city. Although King painted and disinfected the laundry room, the tiny specks of blood on the wall behind the laundry table proved to be his undoing.
We missed about 4 square feet of wall that was able to deliver up enough evidence to positively say this is where this happened at. We were incredibly lucky. We did a lot of good police work, but we had some real lucky things happen that you can't count on in this job.
And King placed one of the limbs in a dumpster that was completely empty.
Unfortunately for him, the dumpster had been emptied out, I believe, an hour prior to him dumping that one leg in there. Otherwise, we would have never found Norman Kloss. He would still be a missing person.
None of Norman Kloss's other body parts were ever found. This case required a wide variety of forensic techniques. Anthropology determined the victim's height. Toxicology found the methamphetamine. DNA tests matched tissue cells from the victim, which had been in storage for 10 years. Finally, the Kastle-Meyer test identified what the killer never saw. A tiny speck of blood behind a laundry table, which DNA testing confirmed was Kloss's.
It goes from how are you ever going to prove this case just with a leg to it's proved with medical and testimonial certainty.
In the not-too-distant future, DNA tests on a single drop of blood will be able to identify such things as the victim's gender, their hair and eye color, height, weight, and ethnicity. Before the trial, prosecutors suffered a setback when their witness, Troy Killup, refused to testify, saying he feared for his life.
I'm not going to go in no courtroom, no nothing. No way, no how. These guys made $3.5 million last year. I don't know if this man's going to pick up and push out and come looking for me. He's got the money to do whatever he needs to do.
So prosecutors reached a plea agreement with Graham King.
I made an accommodation because these people, you know, had fears of this Graham King.
King agreed to plead guilty to second-degree murder, which carries a sentence of 20 years in a maximum security prison, instead of going to trial and risking the death penalty.
He got a bargain. He got the deal of a lifetime. 20 years, he's not going to be that old when he gets out. Certainly not for somebody that cooks methamphetamine and kills people.
I'm very concerned with Mr. Graham King being released, and I think he will be a menace to society. I think it'll happen again.
So this is one of the cases that I do remember, and whenever I give tours or give DNA talks to college classes and such, this is the one story that I will always bring up.
The DNA was very critical for this investigation. Without it, we would never have solved it.
But even now, 10 years later, Norman Kloss's girlfriend still does not accept the forensic results. She continues to believe that Norman faked his own death and that one day he will return.
Hello. Please leave a message at the tone, and Norman and I will return your call. Thank you for calling. Bye-bye.
Firefighters risked their lives to rescue a man from a burning building. But they were too late. The medical examiner found evidence that the victim suffered through more than the smoke and flames.
They used to say dead men tell no tales, but nowadays dead men tell a lot.
Around 5 o'clock in the morning on July 16, 1992, a motorist saw a house on fire in the residential area of Danville, Illinois. He ran to a nearby home for help.
I opened the door, his eyes were huge, and he said, "Call 911.
Within minutes, the firemen arrived. Neighbors assumed the homeowner was away.
Someone had opened the garage door and his car was gone. So we, at that time, then thought, well, good, he's not home, that he's hopefully okay, he's just out for breakfast.
We fought the fire. It was quite intense. Came back out on the porch and then went back in again to do some overhaul, and that's when we saw him.
It was the owner, 68-year-old Charles Lynch, known as Jack to friends. Although badly burned, Lynch was identified through dental records.
I wish no one would have to see anything like that. Someone that has been burned to that degree is, I don't know. It's hard for us to explain.
Jack Lynch was a lifelong bachelor with no children, but he treated the neighborhood children like his own.
He was always there for me when I was a kid. So it was like he was there for my generation, and he was there for my kids when they were young. He was just part of my family.
He was just like a grandpa to him. I guess you could call it, because Jack was a few years older than I. And he just fit right in with the family.
One year when my daughter graduated from 8th grade, I didn't have much money. He made sure that she got a dress for the graduation, which meant a lot to me and her.
After the fire was extinguished, investigators looked for the cause. The fire started on the ground floor, but in 3 separate areas. It was ruled arson, since fires don't start spontaneously in 3 different areas. They found drawers pulled open, mattresses overturned, and signs of disarray. But neighbors said Lynch was a fastidious man. Also troubling was the discovery of tiny bits of rope near Lynch's body, an indication he may have been bound.
I don't think anybody was really guessing, other than something had apparently happened to him. He'd been tied up and then he'd been burnt in the fire.
Since there were no signs of forced entry, it appeared that Lynch either knew his killer or had willingly let him inside.
I can't see why anybody do it. But I hope and I pray to God that they find you before I do.
You know, he put on quite a display. He acted emotionally upset, and he kept demanding to be let in the house. He kept saying he wanted to see what was missing. He wanted to see what had happened and things like that. He brought a lot of attention to himself right off the bat.
This was Jack's neighbor, Ed Kramer, who was with Lynch the night before and was the last known person to see him alive.
He'd gone over to Mr. Lynch's house and talked to him. Then he turned around and he claimed that he borrowed some money from Mr. Lynch, and then he'd left and gone home.
And he had some criminal history past, nothing real extensive at that time that I can recall. Because there was no forced entry into the home. So that would make one think that either Mr. Lynch allowed someone he knew to come in, or it was somebody from within inside the home.
Kramer was immediately a suspect. Since the fire in Jack Lynch's home started in 3 separate locations at the same time, it didn't take fire investigators long to determine it was arson.
I've nearly done it.
The last known person to see Lynch alive was his neighbor, Ed Kramer.
He didn't work anywhere. He had no real alibi to speak of, so Eddie was probably one of the main people we were focusing on.
But Kramer denied having anything to do with Lynch's death or the fire. When asked to take a polygraph test, Kramer agreed and passed. He was no longer considered a suspect. Police found Jack Lynch's car a few blocks away from his home in this housing project parking lot. Lynch's television set was in the back seat. Several other items were missing from Lynch's home, among them a VCR, a microwave oven, a video game unit, and a .357 Magnum handgun.
Really sad. He died for what? I believe the cash under $200 cash, a little over $100 cash.
Even though Jack Lynch's body was badly burned, the autopsy told investigators how he died. Surprisingly, his lungs showed no signs of smoke inhalation.
There was no smoke in his lungs. There was no soot in his mouth. So he did not inhale anything from the fire.
Meaning Jack Lynch was dead before the fire started.
If he had died as a result of the fire, the carbon monoxide levels would be anywhere, it would be from 45 to 85%. His level was right at 4%.
The medical examiner also discovered a number of stab wounds in the body. The throat wound was the largest.
That was a gash, and it was done with tremendous force. That cut the jugular, That cut his larynx. That was almost cut his neck in half.
The motive appeared to be robbery. Just 2 weeks earlier, there'd been several robberies in the same neighborhood. Police wondered whether they were related. A video store and 2 nearby drugstores had been robbed at gunpoint, and this home on nearby Griffin Street had also been burglarized. All of the crimes and the Lynch fire occurred within a half-mile radius. This meant, at least statistically, that the perpetrator lived or worked close by.
Criminals are lazy, as are the rest of us. When we're
I've got a bowl
shopping, we're
himself.
looking for
Hey,
goods or
you've
services,
nearly
we
done it,
tend
haven't
to
you?
want to travel
Cool.
within a very close area around our home. Same thing applies to criminals.
I can remember several murders I worked in. Some of the people lived right across the street and watched us work the scene all day.
Investigator Jack Smith had done some homework on these recent robberies
okay with
and
that bit
noticed
then, or
2
not?
interesting coincidences. First, large numbers of prescription drugs were stolen during the drugstore burglaries. And secondly, living directly in between Jack Lynch's home and the location of the home robbery on Griffin Street was the home of Jamie and Robert Moore, 2 well-known drug dealers and addicts.
The Moores were both addicted to prescription painkillers. No matter how much they had, it just wasn't enough to keep them going. They'd both been using for a while, and that was a big portion of their problem.
It was a big business. The selling of scripts, the selling of the prescription medicines.
On a hunch, Jack Smith recommended that in the event of another robbery in the neighborhood, that police consider Robert and Jamie Moore as possible suspects. They didn't have to wait long. Just hours after the fire, a man and a woman entered a nearby motel with handguns, took money from the front desk clerk, and fled in a van.
The patrol officers responded to the Comfort Inn. Others responded directly to the Moore residence and just waited.
The van drove up to the Moores' home, and Jamie Moore stepped out. The van pulled away, but the police stopped it just around the corner. The driver was Robert Moore. Inside the van was the money from the hotel robbery. Just before she was handcuffed, Jamie swallowed a large number of pills and had to be rushed to the hospital.
And while she was, quote, being guarded, she attempted suicide in the bathroom through a broken light fixture.
Police also found the .357 Magnum the Moores used in the hotel robbery. Could it be the same gun stolen from Jack Lynch's home? When police confiscated Robert and Jamie Moore's van, they found the cash stolen from the hotel robbery and a .357 Magnum pistol.
Talking to Bob Moore, we told him, hey, I want to talk to you about that gun that was in the van. Well, yeah. Where did you get it? And his response was, I got it out of that house the other day when I killed that guy. And my partner and I both just about fell out of our chairs, you know, because there's no way it's ever that easy.
In his taped confession, Robert Moore said he went to Jack Lynch's home to rob him.
And Eddie's been causing trouble with my place. Anyway, I didn't even know we got to talk back there.
Once inside, he overpowered Lynch, tied him with rope, then ransacked the house. But Lynch got loose. Moore admitted he and Lynch fought, and that he stabbed Lynch to death.
She's had a treat, she's got all fresh waters.
Moore said he stole
she's
what
had
he
a dinner.
could, then set fire to the house to
She's
cover
sorted.
up the murder. Moore insisted he committed the crime alone.
no one else was with you at any time when you did what you just talked about? No, not at all. Jamie had a part of it.
Hi, Desi. Yeah, it's just nearly finished.
I didn't. Jamie was just sleeping.
At the time of Robert Moore's confession, his wife Jamie was in the hospital recovering from her suicide attempt. When she was able to speak, she told police a different story than her husband's. Jamie claimed she knocked on Jack Lynch's door as a ruse so that her husband, hiding nearby, could get inside.
Yeah. It was pretty much arranged that she would go in and to make sure Mr. Lynch was home and to get the door open, and then her husband would come in and commit the robbery.
Jamie said she had no idea how Jack Lynch died because when she left, she said Lynch was tied up on the sofa but was still alive. But the forensic evidence contradicted Jamie's story, as well as Robert's. During Jack Lynch's autopsy, the medical examiner found 24 stab wounds. But she also discovered something else. They weren't all made with the same knife. The wounds had been made by 2 different knives. Both were approximately 5 inches long. One had a long, narrow blade, the other was wider. A killer seldom uses 2 different knives. Therefore, the medical examiner concluded there were 2 killers.
It's more likely that each of the 2 people that were there would have their own knife and were inflicting wounds on the victim individually.
In Lynch's kitchen was a burnt and scorched knife holder.
There were 2 large knives missing from that knife holder.
With a search warrant, police discovered both of the missing knives in Robert and Jamie Moore's bedroom behind the couple's bed, covered with Jack Lynch's blood. The knives matched the wounds in Lynch's body in both size and shape.
Oh, I figured out why my
So that in itself
printer
was one
wasn't
very
working.
big piece of evidence that we did have 2 knives that matched the wounds themselves.
I
done it?
personally
Yeah, it's not
thought
now.
that Jamie
Printed it all
had
off.
something to do with it, purely initially because of the 2 knife theory.
There may be a scenario where someone has 2 large knives and is using them to stab a person at the same time, or they have one and they stab a person and then they later get a second knife and stab a person. None of those really seem to make too much sense.
Unfortunately, there were no usable fingerprints on the knives, so there was no physical evidence against Jamie. Also in the Moores' home, police found dozens of empty prescription bottles, many from the pharmacy robberies. They also found the stolen goods from Lynch's home. The Moores' children were playing with Jack Lynch's video games.
Obviously, this crime was out of their league. These people had not been involved in violent type of crimes. But they had been involved in the last week, 10 days of a series of escalating violent crimes involving weapons. So anything was possible.
But prosecutors believed the use of 2 knives to kill Lynch meant that Jamie was not just Robert's partner in crime, but also in murder. Prosecutors believe that Robert and Jamie Moore walked the 2 blocks to Jack Lynch's home. Jamie knocked on Lynch's door to gain entry. Robert was hiding in the bushes. And once the door was opened, Robert went inside. Together, they bound Lynch's hands and feet and looked for items to steal. At some point, Lynch got free. And the forensic evidence suggests that both stabbed Lynch repeatedly with 2 different knives, 24 times in all.
What other sweets did you buy? I know you got jelly beans.
They loaded the stolen items in Lynch's car, started the fire to cover the murder, but made the mistake of setting the fires in 3 different locations, a common sign of arson. They also left behind remnants of the rope used to restrain Lynch. The Moores later abandoned Lynch's car a few blocks away.
I parked the car. The TV was still in the car. If I could have hurried up and got out, I'd have it.
Later that same day, still desperate for money, the couple robbed the Comfort Inn motel using the handgun stolen from Jack Lynch's home. Although police had 2 confessions, one from Robert Moore and the other from his wife Jamie, they differed in many respects. But on the crucial question of who killed Jack Lynch, they were consistent. Robert insisted he alone killed Jack Lynch. The forensic evidence contradicts that.
I think that was probably another part of his reasoning for wanting to take the blame himself so Jamie could be home with the kids while he went to the penitentiary.
He knew there was going to be sufficient evidence to link him up to the murder. And I think he told a story that he could formulate best in his mind to keep his wife from going to jail.
In exchange for dropping the murder charge, Jamie agreed to plead guilty to armed robbery and to testify against her husband.
It's not an easy thing for a person to agree to testify against their spouse, especially when that spouse might be looking at a death penalty.
But the night before she was to testify, she attempted suicide once again.
I made the decision that I was not going to bring her into court and try to force testimony out of her. I had no clue what she might really say once she got on the witness stand.
Although Jamie's suicide attempt prevented her from testifying against Robert Moore, one of Jack's close friends, Kim Arwin, did testify about the kind of man Jack Lynch was. And she got the chance to look the accused killer in the eye.
He was in there when I was on the stand. And he just had this look on him like there was no remorse whatsoever, no kind of feeling. And as I walked off, I looked at him like, I hope he rotted in hell for what he did.
Robert Moore never changed his story, claiming that he alone killed Jack Lynch. Moore was found guilty of murder, but he escaped the death penalty and was sentenced to life in prison with no chance of parole.
The vote was 11-1 in favor of giving death, but the one juror who stated he would not vote for death, as I understand it, indicated that he thought that Bob, if he were given life in prison, that Bob could perhaps be rehabilitated.
I honestly feel the Moores went in there with the intent to kill Jack Lynch. It got out of hand and went from there. But what made it the felony murder was because it involved home invasion, robbery, weapons, and that made it the murder case.
He just ripped the hearts right out of us when they took his life. It was like pulling a piece of my life and my kids, my whole family. And I don't know if he realizes what he did, but he'll never replace or be able to justify to me why he did what he did, or her.
For her part in these crimes, Jamie Moore was sentenced to 39 years in prison. The geographic profiling, the determination that the crimes were related because of their proximity to one another and to the Moores' home, helped solve the case.
Even in the end, in this day and age of mobility, you don't see that many people from out of town coming in and doing something and leave. It does happen from time to time, but the vast majority of crimes are committed by people that are pretty much to be your neighbors.
In 1996, a serial rapist preyed on women, young and old, in South Bend, Indiana. Eventually, 3 victims identified the same man as the perpetrator. But what happens when the forensic evidence points to one man while the victims are pointing to another?
Yes, it is almost done.
Throughout the spring and summer of 1996, police were investigating 4 sexual assault and burglary cases in the River Park section of South Bend, Indiana. All of the crimes occurred on weeknights between 8 and 11 p.m., and the descriptions of the assailant were the same. He was described as a young black male between 16 and 25 years of age, about 5 foot 8 inches tall, with a thin build. One of the homes broken into belonged to this woman, who was asked not to be identified.
It had rained, it had stormed, and I was in bed.
She says the perpetrator kicked in the door while she was asleep. She says she didn't get a good look at him since during the assault, he covered her eyes with a shirt.
First thing he said to me was, "Bitch, I want your money."
In this case, he assaulted her, locked her in a closet, then stole her automobile. But he was clever and left behind very few clues. He wore gloves so he wouldn't leave fingerprints, and he wore a hood or mask to conceal his identity.
I just tried to remember, just do what he tells you to do and you'll be all right. And I was.
Detectives Sergeant Cindy Eastman and Ann Schellinger were investigating the crimes.
There's nothing more stressful as an investigator than having a serial situation taking place, because we know until we solve this, there are going to be more victims.
Although the victims described the assailant similarly, his MO, or method of operation, in each case was different.
When we're looking at serial offenders, usually they stick with what works for them. They normally carry the same weapon. They normally approach the victim in the same manner.
In some of the cases, the perpetrator used a knife. In others, he used a handgun. Sometimes he targeted young women on the street, and other times broke into the homes of elderly women. In terms of forensic evidence, investigators had very little. In one case, a semen sample. In another, a pubic hair, but few other clues. The River Park rapist's most brazen crime happened in July of 1996. The victims were a young man and his fiancée.
They were having an argument. They decided to stop the car, get out, just cool off, talk it out.
Seemingly out of nowhere, the assailant demanded money at gunpoint. He struck the young man and took off with the woman, sexually assaulting her in a wooded area nearby. When the police arrived, their canine unit, armed with the assailant's scent, identified a trail. The dog walked past the tree line where the assault took place and continued into a field. At the spot where the dog lost the scent, police noticed bicycle tire impressions in the grass, raising the possibility that he had used a bicycle to make his getaway. Police staked out the neighborhood, looking for men on bicycles who fit the assailant's description. It wasn't long before a suspect rode right into their trap. Scores of police officers in South Bend, Indiana, searched the River Park area in a hunt for the River Park rapist. They were looking for a young black male living in the general vicinity of the crimes who was using a bicycle as his method of transportation. During a stakeout 3 months into the crime spree,
Yes, Susan,
a police
yeah,
officer
let's
saw a
finish
young
track.
black
You guys
man
are okay.
matching the victim's description riding a bicycle just across the street from one of the crime scenes.
Hi, Susan G.
The suspect was identified as 31-year-old Richard Alexander. Although he had previous brushes with the law, Alexander denied he was the River Park rapist. He claimed he was in the wrong place at the wrong time.
I ain't did nothing, man. On my way home. I'm the only, everybody in the area, it's a quiet neighborhood, whatever, you know what I'm saying? I'm the only black going down the street on a brand new mountain bike.
They seen him riding his bike late, and so that's like a scapegoat. There go, a black man. Let's throw this on him.
A search of Alexander's apartment found a knife, some hoods, and bandanas. At police headquarters, investigators placed Alexander's picture along with 5 others in a photographic lineup and asked the couple who had been attacked if their assailant was among them.
You don't recognize anyone.
The woman could not identify a subject.
How about you? That guy? This guy here? That's the one. That's him.
But her fiancé did.
I'm absolutely certain.
He looked at the photo array and without hesitation pointed to the picture of Richard Alexander as being the suspect that robbed them and sexually assaulted the victim.
So him, that guy, him right
This was the only positive identification. The other victims couldn't say for sure. But soon, they would get a second chance.
Look at the shape. They're easy.
Police arranged for another lineup, this time with the suspects in person. Once again, there were 6 suspects to choose from.
Number 6, step forward and read the lines, please.
The first to step onto the stage was Richard Alexander.
Reportedly, one of the victims gasped when they saw him walk out and perhaps even cried.
Number 3, step forward and say your line.
Each of the suspects was instructed to repeat phrases that the rapist had used during his attacks.
Bitch,
I want your money. Where your
No,
car
but she's
keys
picked
at?
up another really bad habit.
Don't talk.
Waking us
I
up.
want your money.
Number 6, that's
Getting in bed.
After hearing his voice, 2 female victims identified Alexander as the rapist, bringing
And
the
me
number of
too.
identifications to
Every
3.
hour.
Next, forensic
You
scientists
don't stop waking
analyzed
up.
the pubic hair found at one of the crime scenes. Since it didn't have a root, it could not be used for DNA testing. The only option was to compare it to Richard Alexander's hair visually to see if they looked similar. The comparison was inconclusive. Scientists also had a semen sample from one of the victims who had been unable to identify Alexander from the police lineup. When that sample was tested for DNA, it did not match Richard Alexander, so he was not charged for that crime. But he was charged with rape, confinement, burglary, and theft in the 3 other cases. At the trial, the prosecution failed to make their case to the jury. Barbara Griffin was one of the 12 jurors.
I've been working public servant since '67, so I kind of get a feel for people. And I just, on the 4th day, I got a feeling that this man didn't do this.
So there's one other piece of the
There were
scene.
9
was like
white
that.
and 3 black.
Same shape.
9 whites said guilty.
Yeah?
2 blacks
So you're nearly
said
there now.
guilty, but of lesser sentence, and I said not guilty. So I was the only holdout, and the jury was hung.
Y'all got the wrong person, here you go.
4 months later, Alexander was tried a second time with a jury composed entirely of white men and women. Based on the 3 victims' identifications, Richard Alexander was found guilty of 2 of the 3 assaults. He was sentenced to 70 years in prison.
We're just so devastated and just depressed because we knew in our heart he was innocent.
I was crying, you know what I'm saying? Because the way they did me, you know what I'm saying? Just took me off the street, took my life from me.
Barbara Griffin could not believe the news.
I was so angry. I was just angry. I felt like this is another black man going to prison. I felt that way.
Even Officer Eastman had her doubts.
I was sorry and somewhat surprised to hear that the jury did convict. I was very conflicted. I had my doubts, but I could not prove it.
With Alexander behind bars, police assumed the River Park rapes were over, but they were wrong. Had the authorities jailed the wrong man? Richard Alexander says the first year in prison was the hardest, but the second, third, and fourth years behind bars weren't a lot easier. There's a pecking order in prison. Murderers and thieves are held in higher regard than child molesters and rapists. Alexander says he saw more violence inside the prison than he ever saw outside.
I was afraid that I was gonna get killed. Y'all seen guys get raped in the shower. Seen guys get raped. I'm in the shower, taking a shower, and they got this homosexual in there, look like a girl. You know what I'm saying? And you got about 2 guys in there. So I hear a guy out there. The boy was in there knocked out, and they found him laying in the shower. They thought he was dead, blood everywhere.
Alexander did what many inmates do. He wrote letters to everyone he could think of proclaiming his innocence and asking for another trial, with no success. Meanwhile, the burglaries and sexual assaults continued. This time, not in the River Park section, but just a short distance away. And one of those victims identified Richard Alexander's picture from a photo lineup as the assailant.
You're absolutely certain?
Yeah. Even though Alexander was in prison. Detective Ryan Harmon was assigned to investigate these new cases and noticed similarities with the earlier cases.
I didn't investigate the River Park rapes in 1996, so I became a lot more familiar with what happened back then.
The search for the perpetrator took an unexpected turn in April of 2000. When a man called police to say there was a tan Cadillac in his driveway and there was a burglar inside. When the intruder saw the homeowner, he fled on foot. In the foyer was a clear foot impression, which was collected for analysis. In the assailant's car, police found everything they needed.
I found utility bills,
just
some
tip it on the
receipts,
table.
different pieces of
Yeah.
paper that showed Michael Murphy's name
Take
on
a
there,
photograph
as
as
well
it
as
is,
the
just
specific
tipped on the
address
table,
apartment
and then
number.
make a community post.
A
And
background check revealed Michael Murphy had been implicated for sexually assaulting his girlfriend's 9-year-old niece.
Yeah, he touched her. What actually stopped him from actually going through with it was his pager went off, she said.
Detective Harmon interviewed both Murphy's girlfriend and the little girl's mother.
Well, these 2 girls just went on for 2 hours about all these different types of burglaries he had committed.
Michael thought it was big and bad and thought he was cool or what he was doing and thinking he getting away with what he was doing.
With the search warrant, investigators discovered a pair of shoes in Murphy's closet which matched the shoe impression at the burglary scene.
Succeeded in my mission and emptied the entire
Murphy's
shop out of
girlfriend
photo paper.
gave police some pictures of Murphy with some of the
Every
items
single
he
pack
had
of photo
stolen
paper
in the
what was
burglaries.
in that shop.
When confronted with the
And if
evidence,
they refill the shelf
Murphy
again,
said
I'll empty
little.
it again.
He'd say, hey, when I'm all hyped up on cocaine, I need to go out and just, find a girl. Well, things like that told me that he may be a sex offender.
Harmon then called the first investigator of the River Park rapes to ask whether she had ever heard of Michael Murphy.
He had been arrested by me the month prior, So we began working together at that point on Murphy and various other crimes that he had been involved in.
When Cindy Eastman saw the photographs given to police by Murphy's girlfriend, she saw an important clue. In one of the pictures was a chrome and glass wall clock stolen during a sexual assault in 1997, a crime that Richard Alexander was suspected of committing. Eastman immediately phoned Murphy's girlfriend.
She immediately said, "I know exactly what you're talking about. I remember when he came home with it. It's hanging on my wall. Do you want it?"
Cindy revisited that victim and asked her, "Do you have any photographs that may depict the same clock?" And she had a photograph of her son during the holidays standing in front of this clock.
Both detectives began to suspect that the real River Park rapist wasn't Richard Alexander, but Michael Murphy. They just needed some way to prove it. During Richard Alexander's trial 5 years earlier, the pubic hair found on one of the victims could not be tested for DNA since there was no root material on the hair shaft. But science had changed in the 5 years since Alexander's conviction. In 1996, forensic scientists began using a new test to look for DNA in a shaft of hair. The new test was called mitochondrial DNA.
Mitochondrial DNA has given us tremendous power in forensic casework to solve the casework where no other DNA profile can be obtained.
It exists outside of the cell's nucleus. Although it is not as precise as nuclear DNA, it still can provide much genetic information. Technicians clean the hair with chemical solutions which purify the DNA sample. The second step is to amplify it or to make enough copies to analyze. The mitochondrial DNA from the hair was compared to both Richard Alexander as well as Michael Murphy. The DNA from the pubic hair did not match Richard Alexander, but it did match Michael Murphy.
We determined that at every place that we tested these two samples, at all on an average 800 bases that we compared, they were identical to each other.
I got the word, and it was just absolutely exhilarating. We knew then that Richard Alexander was going to be released from prison.
Next, scientists performed DNA testing of the second piece of evidence from the River Park rapes, semen from the rape test kit. In yet another surprise, the DNA did not match Michael Murphy as investigators assumed it would. The DNA profile was then entered into the DNA database of convicted sex offenders in the state of Indiana. And there was another surprise. It matched a third man, a convicted sex offender, Mark Williams.
It was just unbelievable to get this call from the state police lab. And there we have it. We have the two suspects, and now it all makes sense.
Ironically, Richard Alexander, Michael Murphy, and Mark Williams looked similar.
All three of these pictures showed a male black who appeared to be within a close age range. All three had similar musculature and statures. All three of them had similar complexions and bone structure. And they did resemble each other, which again answered the other mystery in this case.
When confronted with the mitochondrial DNA evidence, Michael Murphy confessed.
He was just doing nothing but burglarizing homes every day throughout the whole city. Looking back, I think he's done well over 200 to 250 that I know of, that he's confessed to.
Ironically, Michael Murphy and his girlfriend, who knew nothing about the sexual assaults, followed the River Park rape cases on television.
One time we were sitting at home watching TV and they showed the guy, Alexander. I made a comment about, that's sad, but what he done, and if he done it, I hope, I said, I hope they kill him, put him under, And Michael said, oh, they ain't gonna find nothing now. He ain't do them rapes.
In the face of this new DNA evidence, Richard Alexander was released from prison after serving 5 years and 4 months for crimes he did not commit.
Oh, it was cheers. Everybody stood up and cheered and hugged him, and we got in the car and went on home.
It was so gratifying to me when afterward he came up to me and I held my hand out, but he hugged me and he thanked me, and that's all that needed to be said.
It just solidified all the work. You know, it was like going into a card game when you know you got a royal flush and what's going to beat it.
It still hurts. It still hurts because really ain't nothing been done since I've been out. You know what I'm saying? I wanted an apology, and you know what I'm saying, they apologized, but it ain't really nothing, you know what I'm saying, taking a man's life. 5.5 years of your life taken from your family, loved one, kids, all that stuff hurts.
Michael Murphy was convicted of 1 count of burglary and 1 count of sexual molestation. He was sentenced to 30 years in prison. Mark Williams was convicted of 1 count of rape and sentenced to 40 years in prison. Richard Alexander was a victim of mistaken identity. His innocent bicycle ride past a crime scene cost him his freedom. Now, science had vindicated him. Sometimes, one tiny hair can say more about guilt or innocence than a handful of eyewitnesses. In 1996, Seattle police faced an unusual challenge. A severely wounded dog witnessed the murder of his 2 owners. Could the dog identify the killers, and if so, how? December 9th, 1996, Seattle, Washington. It was going to be a special day for 22-year-old Raquel Rivera. She was starting a new job as a receptionist in a downtown office.
I seen her the night before, and she was really excited about it. She was a little sick, but she was worried about she was going to make it to work or not. She was really excited.
Raquel shared this house in Seattle's South Park section with her longtime boyfriend, Jay Johnson. The two had been together since high school and were talking about getting married.
I loved Jay. He was a great guy. I loved him. He was very, very good to my daughter. You know, they were good for each other.
Just after dawn, neighbors heard gunshots coming from the couple's home.
Probably about 4 or 5 shots, then a break, and then maybe about 6 more shots.
When police arrived, they found the front door off its hinges. The windows had been shattered by bullets. Inside were 2 bodies.
The only thing we have right now is that we found 2 people in the house, a male and a female, both shot.
Raquel Rivera's mother, who lived only a block away, got the phone call every parent dreads.
When I got there, there was police and everybody. They wouldn't let me in the apartment. And I said, it's gotta be Raquel.
The bodies were positively identified as Raquel and Jay. The couple's dog, Chief, a 6-month-old Labrador mix, was also shot.
I poked my head around the corner, saw that the dog was up against the door. He was obviously in pain. He was growling. There were blood traces all over the door where he had smeared blood against that wall. I said, let's get everybody out, get animal control in here, and get the dog out.
This particular case would rate as probably the most severely injured dog that we've ever seen from a gunshot, just by virtue of the fact that it received such a full-on frontal bullet right through the front of the nose.
Unfortunately, despite undergoing emergency surgery, the dog died. An autopsy was performed. It revealed the dog had been shot twice, a non-fatal shot in the shoulder and a bullet through his muzzle.
You could liken it to running face first into the front end of a truck bumper on that in terms of this, given what we could see in terms of the bullet trauma that did to the front of his muzzle and his face.
The evidence told homicide investigators that the killer was searching for something.
Cabinets have been gone through, doors have been opened, the bed was tossed around. So clearly the perpetrators wanted to find something, not just eliminate the lives and witnesses therein, but they were after something.
There was no finesse to this. It was a blitz-style attack. They're in, they shoot the dog, they shoot the owners of the dog. Mr. Johnson was shot several times in the legs, which is indicative of someone trying to extract information before.
The coroner would later describe the murders as execution-style killings. The entire community was asking who would have killed this young couple who had no known enemies. The only clues to the murder of Jay Johnson and Raquel Rivera were a smeared footprint at the couple's front door and some 9mm shell casings. Blood spatter was on the walls, floor, and on the inside of the door. Police discovered that a 15-year-old boy living across the street in an apartment building had seen the shooting.
This person described them as Samoan males dressed in black, very large men, and one wearing a bandana.
The boy said the two men kicked open the front door, shot the dog, and then moved into the house. The witness could no longer see them, but he heard the firing.
He saw the dog, he heard 2 shots, and he heard the barking, and then he heard the dog's yelping and the dog's screams.
The boy said the men left minutes later and drove away in a red Camaro, driven by a third Samoan man. Police suspected the men were members of a local gang, Mad Pack.
There's a large Samoan community in Seattle, are law-abiding, hardworking people. But with every group, you've got a criminal element. And the Mad Pack made up a large portion of their criminal element.
They were a gang in the sort of worst sense of the word.
Just 3 days earlier in Seattle's Chinatown, there had been a similar shooting. The victim, Johnny Pake, survived the attack.
That being a Samoan male sitting in a red car, a very large Samoan male.
Shell casings from the Chinatown shooting were compared to those taken from Jay and Raquel's apartment. They matched. Police now scoured the city looking for any Samoans driving a red Camaro. Amazingly, they didn't have to look far. On the afternoon following Jay and Raquel's murder, police noticed a red Camaro slowly driving past the murder scene.
Driving back to the crime scene and checking things out is not an uncommon thing for a suspect to do. It's the old return to the scene of the crime cliche. And it happens.
The driver of the red Camaro was Charles Nico, a known member of the Mad Pack gang. Although Nico denied any involvement in the shooting, the 15-year-old eyewitness identified him as the driver of the getaway vehicle. When threatened with the death penalty, Nico finally told police what happened. He said the motive was drugs. The Mad Pack gang members heard that Jay and Raquel had cocaine in their house, and they decided to steal it. But after breaking in, the couple said they had no cocaine, and then the men started shooting. Nico identified the shooters as 22-year-old Kenneth Lealuala Ali, whose street name was Sabo Claus, and 24-year-old George Tuilafano, whose street name was Scooby. Both were high-ranking members of the Mad Pack gang.
I already knew who they were because, you know, they ran around South Park. They were bullies. They were always beating everybody up.
Both men denied any involvement in the shooting and said they had alibis. A search of their apartment did not produce the 9mm murder weapon. The smeared footprint on the front door could not be matched to either suspect. And 8 red stains found on the right sleeve of Sabo Claus' jacket was sent for DNA testing, but it wasn't the victim's blood.
They get a result that is not human-based because the genotype does not come back to genes associated with a human being at all. They then are scratching their heads with, hey, what's going on here?
In fact, investigators weren't sure what it was. With no forensic evidence to tie the suspects to the crime, Seattle police feared a conviction might be impossible. As Jay Johnson and Raquel Rivera were laid to rest side by side in a Seattle cemetery, their families demanded justice. To decipher exactly what happened at the crime scene, investigator O'Keefe needed to distinguish between the dog's blood spatter and that of Jay and Raquel.
I requested through my Sergeant Cindy Tallman that an officer follow the dog to the vet and draw blood from the dog immediately. My thinking at the time was to differentiate between the human blood at the scene and the dog blood.
The blood spatter and bullet casings in the apartment, and the eyewitness account of the 15-year-old boy who lived across the street gave police a rough idea of what had happened. After the intruders kicked open the door, the dog was shot in the shoulder. Then the men went into the bedroom, where they shot Raquel. They took Jay into an adjoining room and shot him in the leg while demanding the couple's cocaine. One of the men left to shoot Raquel once more. And when Jay said the couple never had any drugs, they killed him. Despite his shoulder wound, Chief again tried to protect his owners and ran into the bedroom to attack the killers. But why wasn't the victim's blood on the suspect's clothes? Investigators say both Jay and Raquel were shot from a distance and were also wearing clothes, pajamas and t-shirts, which absorbed the blood spatter. But with Chief, there was nothing to absorb the blood.
Who was short-haired and had not long hairs around the muzzle or face or neck area, so any kind of serious wound causing a lot of blood is obviously going to spill or spray or go off. It's not going to cling to the coat because there's such a short, smooth coat, it's going to roll right off.
Chief was very close to Kenneth when he was shot, and we know also that Chief was shot in the muzzle area
Now police discovered the possible key to the mysterious red stains on the right sleeve of Sabo Claw's jacket.
Detective O'Keefe and myself decided to see if we're dealing with a non-human source, namely a dog. So with that, we needed to seek out laboratories that do DNA testing with non-humans. And through some research, we came upon a lab in Davis, California, headed by Dr. Joy Halverson.
Dr. Joy Halverson is an expert in investigating the parentage of world-class show dogs. Championship caliber show dogs can be worth thousands of dollars, and where there's money, there's often corruption. Dishonest breeders engage in a practice known as litter loading, where pups from inferior dogs are mixed in with pups from champion dogs and sold at inflated prices. Knowledgeable buyers now analyze the DNA profiles of their new pups in order to confirm their dog's championship parentage.
Dog DNA is exactly like human DNA. The only difference would be we use a different set of DNA markers, but in terms of its chemical properties and the way it behaves with these testing procedures, it's exactly the same.
Police suspected the red spots on Sabo Claw's right sleeve came from the victim's dog, Chief. Dr. Halverson cut out a piece of the sleeve with the red stains on it and analyzed it with a PCR-based DNA test.
A little piece of that fabric is taken and put into a tube, and various buffers and so on are added to it. Blood cells will come off the fabric into the liquid, and then the various treatments are done to extract the DNA from that.
The results were consistent with the blood from a dog. But was the blood from the victim's dog, Chief? Dr. Halverson compared the DNA markers from the blood on the suspect's sleeve to the blood taken from Chief during his autopsy. The result was a perfect match. The blood on Sabo Claw's right sleeve was the blood of Chief. Prosecutor Tim Bradshaw knew he'd face a challenge from defense lawyers.
We were unable to find any other case, homicide case in the country, where canine-based DNA had been admitted into evidence.
The defense lawyers not only would challenge the admissibility of the canine DNA evidence, they described it as hocus pocus, and boldly predicted their clients would walk free. The two gang members charged with killing Jay Johnson and Raquel Rivera were facing first-degree murder charges. Prosecutors not only had the teenaged eyewitness from across the street who identified the two in a police lineup, they also had DNA evidence from the victim's dog on Kenneth Leilua Ali'i's sleeve. Also on his sleeve were hairs. They were not human. But they were compared to Chief's hair and found to be consistent. This wasn't as good as the DNA evidence, but certainly wouldn't hurt the prosecution's case. The main suspect, Kenneth Leilua Ali'i, became so disruptive he had to be restrained in a wheelchair for the 8-week trial. He taunted the judge, the family members, saying he'd never get convicted.
Every time we walk in, he would just look at us and laugh at us, and, throw kisses at us when the girls would walk in. I hate him.
Prosecutors presented their theory of how the murders were committed based on the blood spatter evidence. Prosecutors believe that the suspects kicked open Jay and Raquel's door and immediately were confronted by the dog Chief. They shot the dog in the shoulder.
It was only that lineup that No, not what it was. We figured it out.
After killing both Rachel and Jay, Chief once again tried to protect his owners. Chief was shot at point-blank range. The blowback blood spatter landed on Ken's right sleeve. When presented with the DNA evidence linking Ken's jacket to the dog, the judge ruled that legally, the animal DNA was the same as human DNA. If the testing was the same, then so was its value as evidence.
We took advantage of the fact that the science is no different than the human testing that's done now in the forensic community. And there's really there's nothing groundbreaking about it. It's just a different set of DNA markers developed for dogs.
It was the first time animal DNA was used in the United States as evidence in a criminal case. Kenneth Lealuala Ali'i took the stand and said he had an explanation for the dog blood on his sleeve.
He told the jurors that a few nights prior to the murders, he was at a dance club in Tacoma, got into a fist fight with another man there, and that thereby explains the blood. That did give me an opportunity to ask him whether the man he was fighting with had hit him with a dog, and he really couldn't explain that.
After 12 hours of deliberation, the jury sentenced both men to life in prison without parole. Kenneth Lealuala Ali'i laughed as the verdict was read. But the last laugh was reserved for Chief, the victim's courageous dog.
I had a few puns about our case in chief, but the third victim here, Chief, was exceedingly important to our case. And, we're grateful to that, but we're also, this will sound a little hokey, but grateful to the scientific community for making a contribution to justice, and that's exactly what happened here.
Jay and Raquel had bought Chief for protection. Little did they know that he would someday bring their killers to justice.
A piece of evidence, the one victim who could never speak, ended up providing perhaps the most eloquent of testimony. And that was from the DNA profile that clearly placed defendant Lealuala Ali'i at the crime scene.
The verdict brought small satisfaction to Raquel's mother, who now makes a point of keeping a dog around the house. Her only child, who she raised by herself, is dead for no reason, leaving a great void in her life that no amount of justice can ever fill.
We were so close. Her and I, as she was growing up, just her and I.
What I learned from this case is that if it's alive, it has DNA. Detectives can use DNA in their cases in ways that we never thought of 10 years ago. There is plant DNA. There is animal DNA. Every domestic animal has a DNA databank now. The Department of Interior has a laboratory where they do DNA on wild species.
Just from my own experience of owning animals, I mean, I'm sure if I looked on my clothing right now, I'd find some animal hairs. And if somebody kidnapped me and put me in the trunk of their car, probably a few of those hairs would end up on the trunk of their car. So if someone's being alert and thinking about these things, I think they're valuable sources of evidence.
And so it's a constant reminder for investigators to be vigilant in your approach to any sort of crime scene, and to be quite open-minded and imaginative about what application you can do as far as what science is available. Because to a large degree, science is leading the way, and we got to keep up.
When a beautiful young woman in Ohio met a handsome young doctor, it was love at first sight. During candlelight dinners, the two spoke of marriage, with a ceremony on a distant beach at sunset. But those plans were delayed when the prospective bride fell ill. When medical science couldn't find the cause of the problem, forensic science and a hidden camera did. At 33 years old, Michelle Baker was ready to settle down, get married, and start a family. Her dreams were soon realized when a girlfriend introduced her to a soft-spoken new doctor in town, Dr. Maynard Munsing II.
I was the happiest woman in the world at that point. I mean, he was every woman's dream. He was very successful, very good-looking.
Michelle worked as a firefighter and a paramedic, and the two shared an interest in emergency medicine. Munsing was also 33 years old, both were divorced, and there was an immediate attraction. Within a month, Dr. Munsing moved into Michelle's small home in Huber Heights, Ohio. The couple spent weekends caring for Maynard's two children from a previous marriage. And soon, Michelle had some happy news of her own. She was going to have a baby.
He said, "We're getting married in Key West, barefoot, on the beach at sunset." I was blown away.
So the two flew off to Florida. But on their first night there, Maynard changed his mind, asking Michelle if they could postpone the wedding so his family could attend.
I felt devastated. I also felt like if that is the way that he wanted things to be, then I had to respect his wishes.
Later that night, the couple went to the Hard Rock Cafe. But after they left the restaurant, Michelle had severe cramps and some light bleeding. Fortunately, with a fiancé who was a doctor, Maynard reassured her. He told her there was nothing to worry about.
He just had me lay down. He said that it was fine. The next day it stopped.
After returning home from vacation, Michelle saw her physician, Dr. John Shy, just to make sure everything was okay.
I'm trying to allay her concern because I don't think it's a big issue. Michelle, I think, was primarily concerned because of her age, and this being her first pregnancy, she was frightened. Her concerns were that she had a history of endometriosis, and she thought that might be a problem, but I reassured her that the chance of a problem was remote.
Maynard purchased this $320,000 brick house for the couple to raise their new child.
It was all very much a whirlwind as far as everything went. The baby, the romance, just the unbelievable situation.
You've done it!
But Michelle's pregnancy was a difficult one, with increasing cramps and occasionally bleeding.
Well done.
When neither Michelle's doctor or her fiancé could determine the cause of her illness, she did a little research of her own and made her diagnosis. It was a condition so rare, medical experts could hardly believe it.
I thought it was a leaning tower of Pisa. I was right.
Although Michelle Baker and Dr. Maynard Munsing were expecting a child and had plans to marry, Maynard revealed some news which threatened those plans. He admitted he still had lingering feelings for a former girlfriend, Tammy Irwin, despite their stormy past.
You've told all these people such horrible things about her and what kind of person she is, and I said, and you still have feelings for her?
Over the 4th of July weekend in 2000, Michelle planned to stay home while Maynard left for a fishing trip with a friend about an hour's drive away.
We spent the morning together, had a good morning, really good morning, And he packed some clothes and he left.
That was Prisoner of Love here on All Request Hour, Q92. Let's go to the request line. From Huber Heights. Hello, what can I play for you? Yeah, I was wondering if you could play...
But later that night, while listening to a local radio station, Michelle heard a familiar voice calling in to request a song.
The caller sounded very much like Maynard. And I just stopped right there. I just stopped dead in my tracks. And I listened, and the DJ asked him, he said, well, who is this? And he said, Maynard.
You done it.
Now suspecting she had been lied to, Michelle asked a neighbor to drive her to the home of Maynard's former girlfriend, Tammy Brew.
Here they are. Okay, everybody.
Michelle's fears were confirmed when she saw him outside with
1,
Tammy.
2, 3.
Fishing trip, huh? Not what it looks like. It's exactly what it looks like.
A confrontation and...
Can't see. Puzzle number 1. That's one. Puzzle 2. You don't know what they are. Puzzle 3. We haven't got a clue what these jigsaws are whatsoever. They just came in a brown box. There's no pictures. We don't know what they are. The first one was sold.
Yes.
Well, the fourth one, call it now. Yeah?
The fourth one
Was the Colosseum. We don't know what these are. So
the fourth one is a Colosseum, and 3, 2, 1 are a mystery.
Yeah.
Complete mystery. Where is everybody?
that's why I said you need to make a post. That's why I need to take a picture.
Yes. Take a picky.
One, 2 or 3. And snapshot. Take a picture.
Okay, I will make up a community post until soon after I've gone offline. Up there, I mean.
Yeah.
Right. I will see you guys later on for a little bit of yelling.
I just stuck my fucking toe on that Land Rover.
You knew it was there.
I know, I forgot it had metal wheels. Ow.
Anyway. I will see you guys later on. Thank you so much for joining us. And I'm glad this is finished.
You've done it. It's finished.
First mystery puzzle solved.
Can't bleed and see him.
Yes, indeed, it is. Oh dear. Awesome. Right, I'll see you guys later.
See you all later.
I know we're gonna tear it apart, but there you go. That's, you know, it is what it is, but I got the picture to prove it, so.
Yeah.
That's why I keep the photos.
Gonna break it?
Yeah, right, hang on. I'll see you guys later on. Lots of love. Bye, everybody.
Bye,
Later.
everyone.